the 4 years where you're on Rogers Community Cable, and I just mentioned, no budget, you're producing an hour a week.
Yeah.
What do you think it taught you?
Well, I was editing all the clips myself. And, as I went to school for broadcasting, I learned how to shoot video and do lighting and audio and edit and all that stuff.
And you drive from college to the station to then
my last year of college was the first year of the Tom Green Show, so we were sort of doing them both at the same time. With a lot of my classmates were working on the show with me. It became apparent early on that the funny part wasn't the thing that I was doing on the street. It was the people's reaction, was the joke. It was the punchline, right? Which sort of was something that I started to really figure out in the editing room. I'd be editing the clip where I'd go downtown Ottawa with some crazy contraption and we'd get back to the editing room and, I didn't have the reaction shot, and I'd get back and I'd go, no, we got to see that, lady on the street kind of confused, You can get the shot of me all day, but make sure you're always looking one eye open, making sure you're looking to the side, who's reacting, And when we first went to MTV, there was sort of a lot of creative sort of push and pull in those first few months because, the MTV editors and producers would tighten everything up and they would cut all the reaction shots out. MTV at the time had a policy that they didn't want anyone over the age of 35 appearing on camera on their network. Well, all the reaction shots were from old people, because they reacted more, They were more confused by the bizarre things, So I had to convince them to use the shot of the old lady or the man on the street who's over 35, getting mad at me and, doing all that kind of stuff, so.
You said it is very easy, especially when there's money involved, to trust someone else's instincts more than your own. And almost every time that happens, you end up kicking yourself for doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, later in life when the show was a hit, there was definitely times where you'd have an opportunity to do something because there was a paycheck involved and it's not always the worst thing to do either, I mean, I think in hindsight I go maybe I'm glad I sold out a few times. I got this nice farm now, it's okay. No one thinks about that movie anymore anyways.
When you were in the process of this, you've done this pilot for the CBC.
Yeah.
As I understood it, you, in a semi-joking way, would talk a lot about suicide. If the pilot didn't get picked up.
I guess maybe that was me just trying to explain how important it was to me that this thing worked because I had no plan B whatsoever. I did not know what I would possibly do with my life if I wasn't able to work in television. I think that people that in comedy who joke about death probably love life more than people that don't think about it. I'm so terrified of the idea of everything coming to an end because I love life so much that the only way that I can make sense of it is to make a joke about it, right? The only way that I can make it seem, less terrifying is to say something about it and get a laugh at the expense of the fact that we are all going to die at some point, right? So I think that's always been true in comedy. But, the root of it, was we had a pilot on the CBC and it
took 9 months to get any decision.
Yeah, and if it didn't get picked up, I was back to square one. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. This was supposed to be the moment where it launched it. Okay, now of course we do the pilot for the CBC, and now we're going to get the big network deal, and then we're just going to. And so when the idea of there being a setback there was terrifying. We were fortunate we got a deal with the new Canadian Comedy Network after the pilot, and we did 26 episodes for them. So the show was on in Canada, and the late Howard Lapidus, who's a good friend of mine, was my manager for many years. He passed away a few years ago. I met him in Canada, and he saw what I was doing, and then he brought our tapes to MTV, and they saw these tapes, and they were kind of like, do you have any more of these tapes? And we were like, well, yeah, I've got about 2,000 more of these tapes, And so that really piqued their interest. But before they really got to that point, I had to pitch the show to them. There's a process. They flew me down to MTV saw the few tapes Howard had given them. They flew me down to LA, and they had these pitch meetings at the House of Blues on Sunset. I pitched the show, and that ended up resulting in us getting picked up by MTV.
What ultimately led to the MTV show stopping?
Well, I mean, the truth be told, I quit the show because I got cancer. Okay.
Initially stopped production.
Yeah, so the show was basically may have been the #1 show on MTV that year. There wasn't many shows on MTV at the time, remember? There was The Real World, there was Road Rules, and there was Celebrity Deathmatch and Us.
You were, and they'd run you a million times a day.
They'd run the show all day. So the show was a hit. I all of a sudden, we just moved to Los Angeles. So there was a lot of things changing. Like the show was in New York for the first year, and then.
But you found you couldn't do like the same bits in New York anymore
it was
because
very
of
difficult
the
to
mob
walk.
scene that would start.
Yeah, it was. The show was so popular that we would go out to film in Manhattan. There's so many people per square block in Manhattan that, you know, the second the camera came out, everybody would see me and they'd start crowding around, and you couldn't sort of. There was no element of surprise for these pranks anymore, right? So
You were no longer the anonymous figure you once were. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to kind of go to a city where at least there was fewer people per block, and I could walk down the street and find somebody that maybe didn't recognize me right away, and then kind of mess with them, you know. But and there was also an element of I was getting these movie offers. I now just shot the movie Road Trip, which hadn't come out yet. Then we literally just moved to LA. We'd been there for a few months, and I got cancer. Half the crew moved out with me. People gave up their apartments in New York. The show was a hit. We were going to be on for years, as far as we were concerned. And then I got cancer, and that was sort of a major curveball, right? And we filmed, the last show was the cancer special. We filmed an episode of me dealing with cancer. That took about a year to really deal with. There was some pretty invasive lymph node dissection surgery where they cut you up here, and it's very painful, and kind of a recovery time was. And
I will ask you.
I didn't really necessarily want to be running around on the street filming with my body cut open. There was a lot of physical comedy in the show. Like I'd be always falling down and doing sort of stuff like that was quite, you know, running from security guards and things like this.
They had to try everything possible to talk you out of quitting the hit show, right?
You know,
I mean, regardless of if you were sick, I'm sure they said, well, you can come back when you get better. Or...
Yeah, I think it was sort of more along the lines of stopping the show. I had now been doing this show for like 7 or 8 years or something like that, you know, like getting up, going out in the street, pulling pranks, doing this stuff. It had been my show for so long. Now we had a big network there, and they were, you know, very intense about how they wanted to edit it, and there was a lot of sort of creative push and pull there, which was frustrating. And
you got sick of the bullshit?
A little bit, and at the same time, you know, I mean, this is me being completely honest. I had like probably about 3 movie deals on the table that were paying me a lot more money than MTV was paying me, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to take some time off running around on the street, getting chased by security guards and injuring myself. I'm in a lot of pain. I've just written the movie Freddy Got Fingered. It was purchased. They were going to let me direct it. That was going to take a year. So I kind of just said, we're going to stop the show and take some time off the show. And I went and made, Freddy Got Fingered and Stealing Harvard, and Road Trip came out, and did a few other movies after that. And then it was a good decision. And then when I decided I wanted to go back to MTV, I did go back to MTV and made a talk show, so the new Tom Green Show. So
you said, I think this is specific to the films. In hindsight, would I have done everything the same? I probably wouldn't have, because I would have known the effect it would have on me. What do you mean?
There's been an evolution on. There's been some sort of a changing sort of
mindset or
mindset
yeah.
about that movie, Freddy Got Fingered. Because when I wrote that book, I mean, you know, it was sort of like, you know, it was, you know, there was a lot of harsh criticism of the movie,
yeah.
and now I can't really walk down the street without somebody yelling, "Daddy, would you like some sausage at me?" or some crazy line from the movie, and people like the movie now. But at the time when I wrote that, I was thinking, oh, geez, maybe I shouldn't have made this movie, you know? But with 20 years perspective on it, I mean, it's kind of a big part of kind of the sort of trajectory of my life, you know? It was a shocking, weird, polarizing thing, which at the time kind of hurt when Roger Ebert said that it was the worst movie ever made or whatever. But now, like, you know, 20 years later, people talk about it and like it, and I stuck to my guns and got to make a weird, crazy movie, and got to write and direct it and do a lot of things I would have never gotten to do, so it was pretty cool. This is the Freddy Got Fingered poster, of course. We had fun making it. I got to direct it and write it, and my friend and I wrote the movie in the office at MTV. When we were done working on the show, I would sit down with my friend Derek Harvey, and we wrote the script to this. And it was frustrating because there was these movie studios wanting me to do these comedy movies, and I'd be like, this doesn't really seem very funny on paper, you know? I probably wasn't reading the script properly, didn't know what they were going to do with it. But regardless, it made us think, well, we should just write our own script and let's make it the craziest thing we could possibly do, right? So we sat down and wrote this script, and funnily enough, 20th Century Fox said they wanted to make it, and believe it or not, I'm proud of that piece of crap.
You remember after you screened it for the head of the studio, his reaction?
I do, yeah. He actually loved it. They said it was the best first cut by a first-time director he'd ever seen, you know, and it was amazing. So then we went to Focus Group the movie, right? So
in Phoenix.
In Phoenix, Arizona. We fly out to Focus Group the movie. I was sitting in the back of the room. Nobody knew I was there. They play the movie for everyone. And then some sort of uptight guy with a clipboard comes out and he starts talking to the audience. What didn't you like about the movie? Now, obviously, with this movie breaks the focus group. I mean, because the entire movie was about doing things that you're not supposed to do. So it automatically scored low, right? So now everybody's nervous, and we get in the plane back to Los Angeles, and the next day it's, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to make them like the movie? How are they going to fill the focus group out better? So, you know, things get cut, things get changed. So the movie actually, ultimately, that came out was not my original director's cut. It was still a crazy movie and fun, and I like what happened, but the original cut was so much more